Welcome to BrandBusters with your hosts, James Schwinn and Sean Lee. Together, we bust open the latest in CPG, retail media, and life, or whatever the we want. And for today's episode, we got something special cooked up for ya. Extra spicy. Take it away, Sean.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. Episode 16 of BrandBusters. Today, we're going to keep it going. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We've got a lot of really great founder interviews lined up that we can't quite reveal yet, but that will be dropping throughout the rest of the year. But we were talking and wanted to just do something a little bit different today and have James actually interview me on my time founding the Zevo insect brand out of P&G Ventures. So I'm not going to talk about myself. I'm not going to do an introduction. I will turn it over to James, and hopefully you guys can get some value out of what I learned innovating inside a big company and, fighting the antibodies of a big company and doing all of that to try to keep the entrepreneurial spirit alive to launch a brand that's now doing about 200 million in annual revenue. So we'll jump into it. I'll share some of the stories and lessons from the early days, and hopefully for anybody working at a big CPG company, this can give you some inspiration. If you're working as a founder or at a smaller company, I think the lessons are still really applicable because I tried to throw a lot of the big company playbook out of the window. So I'll turn it over to James and we will dive in, and hopefully I can give some entertaining and educational stories.
Man, I'm so excited to put Sean on the hot seat here. Fun fact, this is actually going to be a roast, not an interview. So let's see what happens.
Totally fine. I make it easy. I make it easzy. That's for sure. My wife.
So I'm really looking forward to this. Sean is someone I've known for probably 14 or 15 years, and kind of always admired from afar. We did get to work together for a little bit, and now we're obviously doing this. But for those of you that don't know Sean, he's a co-founder and president of Cincy Brands, a CPG operating company, co-host of the BrandBusters, obviously, and co-founder of Zevo Brand, which we'll be spending a lot of time today talking about. Sean spent a decade at Procter Gamble in brand management, leading brands like Iams Pet Food and Old Spice deodorant. He was the former CMO of Amify, which sold to Cart.com earlier this year. Sean has worked as an executive for private equity and venture capital-backed CPG and e-commerce businesses. He is a proud dad of three and active guy, and has been married. Are you 10 years yet? Or you're knocking on it, right?
Oh man. Next year will be 10 years. Yeah. Next year.
Yeah. Wow. So has an amazing wife and family. So shout out Robin and kids. But today we're really going to focus on, this kind of your founder's journey, which I think is a unique one, right? I think a lot of our guests that have previously been on BrandBusters, which have some phenomenal experience, they really kind of started kind of their own companies in the last maybe incubate like within one of these more conglomerates, larger organizations. And there's, you talk about entrepreneur and intrapreneur, and I think you had a really unique experience being able to do that at P&G. So, before diving into how you founded Zevo, maybe share with our guests, like, what is P&G Ventures? Like, how did you get involved in that? Leaving brand management of Old Spice and Iams.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And every company is a little bit different, but I'll kind of walk through the evolution of P&G Ventures. And I think there's Kellogg Ventures, AB InBev has one. There's a lot of these venture groups within big companies, and they've been around for a very long time. So if you think of a big company, most of them are organized in business units and regionally, right? So you might be the brand manager of North America Old Spice, and there may be a global Old Spice brand that helps create stuff that gets pushed out to all the markets. But that's how a lot of these big CPG companies are organized. So, those brands have their own P&L, they're making their own investment choices, they're bringing in real profit dollars, they're innovating for their own brands. But a lot of these companies are like, great, we still need to find new business somewhere. And that can be through acquisitions, or that can be through using their own internal R&D teams and consumer research teams to try find opportunities that the P&Gs, the Kellogg's, the Unilevers of the world can then go and launch into. So P&G had a group in different iterations. It was called New Business Creation, that had been around for quite some time. I think probably about a decade, there hadn't really been anything like a new brand that had been launched out of it. Maybe some interesting technology, but not a full scale new brand like a Febreze or a Tide or something that you would think of as a true like household name. So I had been on the Old Spice brand, and I was in my mid 20s. We were doing really well. Like for big CPG, if you grow 10 or 11% a year, like that's considered fantastic. Most of these brands grow 1 or 2% a year, and a lot of it's through pricing and other kind of distribution mechanisms. So I was kind of dubbed as the guy that knew the internet and e-commerce because Old Spice was geared towards a younger audience. We did a lot with Reddit and YouTube and Facebook advertising in the early days of that. So I had been promoted into a role where I was doing global e-commerce for all of P&G. So I was helping a lot of brands around the globe think about how to go to market on Amazon when Amazon was still, not as big as it is today, and how to think about D2C or direct to consumer websites. So I did that and kind of traveled the globe and consulted with all of our brands and created some best practices and was looking for my next opportunity. And I wanted to take all this stuff I had done on Old Spice, all this e-commerce playbook work I'd created for all of our brands, and put it into practice. So this role in the newly formed P&G Ventures, which was the rebranded new business creation unit, which, like I had said, hadn't really had anything in probably a decade that turned into anything. It had popped up, and it probably was a risky career move because going somewhere that hadn't had a hit like is usually a career dead end. But I was kind of getting bored. I didn't want to go back to like a normal role. So I liked the guy by the name of Patrick Krause, who was leading the group. Met with him. He pitched me his vision on, come here, we'll find an area that we can go disrupt, just like Dollar Shave Club and Harry's Razors and Casper Mattresses, all these other guys were doing. And I'll pretty much give you air cover and free reign to actually go create something and launch something and that you'll feel proud of. So that was kind of P&G Ventures and how I got there. But P&G Ventures as a whole was set up interestingly, which was like, let's go identify spaces that we want to go disrupt, not have a solution, but be open to where the market could take us. And the space that I was working on we were calling it the safe and effective space. So finding old sleepy categories that maybe had more chemical chassis formulas or products that we could launch a newer or better for you or safer version of. And that's how kind of P&G Ventures was making different bets. And we were doing a lot of external benchmarking, studying startups. I think we did a really good job of kind of looking externally to see how people were doing it. And that's the Ventures group. So I'll kind of stop there. That's P&G Ventures in a nutshell. And I think they're still kind of operating that way today. And the Zevo brand still operates within P&G Ventures. It hasn't been moved back to its own business unit yet, which would probably be the home care division of P&G.
In ratio of organic versus inorganic, I know, P&G was guilty of a couple like concepts that maybe didn't hit that everything's not going to turn out to be a Febreze or Swiffer, and same thing with the other big CPG co's out there. So did they find more success? I see Native was I think a pretty big win. I know that didn't come through Ventures, but how did you see that kind of evolve versus, hey, let's just go out and identify acquisition targets versus like, hey, let's build something like Zevo?
Yeah. I mean, I think big consumer goods companies are notoriously bad about launching new brands. It happens. Zevo was an example of it, but it's incredibly hard, right? If you think about how big CPG companies hire, they hire really smart, talented, and intelligent people, oftentimes with MBAs, and they're brought in to basically, come into a publicly traded company that's going to grow a few percentage points a year and probably pays a dividend. So a lot of it's kind of a, project management, financial management, marketing exercise to make sure that you're not taking too many risks, you're continuing to grow the business, and you're always paying that dividend. The profile of that does really well in that role is a completely different profile of somebody that's going to be an early stage founder and launch a business. Like they could not be more polar opposite, right? Like, and that's not a knock on anybody. Like those roles exist and they're great roles. And there's a reason P&G is worth billions and billions of dollars because it's got great people being a steward of those big brands and billions of dollars. But that profile tends to be more risk averse, tends to be more process driven. And when you're launching a startup, you cannot be that way. You have to be, pivot quickly, like make decisions, take on risk. Things are going to fail and you got to be okay with that. So a lot of these like ventures groups across every company, I don't care who you are, really struggle, right? Because they manage them the same way that they would manage the launch of Tide Pods, right? Which is not the same because you already have an established brand that's launching a new form. If you're launching a brand new brand that nobody's ever heard of and introducing that, it's a completely different skill set. So I think that's probably the most challenging thing in launching in a big company. And big companies just aren't really set up well to do that. So with that being said, I think what was really unique about what we did, and I would say like the magic of Zevo at the time was I knew by the time I had taken this role that I wasn't going to be a lifer at P&G. You know, being a lifer at P&G is a great thing. You can make a lot of money, have a very fulfilling career. I knew I wanted to go smaller company. I knew I wanted to kind of do my own thing at some point and stay local in Cincinnati. So I was already willing to go take a risk and say, I'm going to try launch something. And if it doesn't work, who cares? Like if I hit a career dead end at P&G, I'm going to leave anyway, because I was already kind of planning in my roadmap that I wanted to do something with a smaller company. The guy that I was working for, Patrick Krause, he was on the tail end of his career. His kids were about to go to college. His wife was actually the head of purchasing of all of P&G. He probably had about 5 years left in him before retirement. And he basically said, I want to make a big impact and I want a legacy. So we're going to do anything we can to so I can go out and retire on top. So I feel like that mindset of both of us being like, F it, we're going to throw everything out the window and just try do what we feel is right to launch something and make it work, was like a dangerous, 1 + 1 = 3 combo between the two of us that, had he not been my manager, or he was a career driven manager that wanted to go back and be the brand manager of Swiffer, or the director of Swiffer, or the VP of Swiffer, he probably would have played it a lot safer. And for me, if I wanted to go do that too, I probably would have played it a lot safer. So that was what I thought was really interesting, is we were like, okay, you've got this safe and effective space. We had just seen what happened with Harry's and Dollar Shave Club, basically disrupting P&G that had like a 70% market share in razors. P&G raised the prices, razors are super expensive. These guys came in and basically flipped that model on its head and started stealing market share. So we looked at a couple of things in safe and effective, and insect control always came to the top. It was a globally growing category. Outside the US, it's a bigger problem in like Brazil, China, India. It's rapidly growing. And all the players had the same hallmarks. They were like, brands from the 50s and 60s, really harsh chemicals. It's really hard to launch a new insect product because of all the in the US, the EPA regulations. Every state has its own regulatory body for different insect products. So we were kind of looking at it and like, everybody's got this. The insight was everybody has that like rusty can of Raid or Hot Shot in their garage that's probably been like burning a rust ring on their concrete floor or the shelf that it's on. And you get it out and you spray it and you're like, gosh, I don't want to breathe this stuff in. Like, I don't want my kids breathing it in. I certainly am not going to use it in my house. Or you feel like you gotta leave. So we kind of looked at it and we're like, there's been no real innovation for a very long time. It's a hard market to get into. So a startup probably isn't going to go there because of the amount of heavy lifting to get things approved with the EPA and all the different states. And if we can bring something that kind of is the method home care version, better ingredients, safer for you, something that you'd be comfortable using around kids, puppies, your family, with packaging that looked more inviting and friendly. So maybe aluminum instead of steel, maybe a clear teardrop spray bottle, than, something that's in all white that looks like it's a spray bottle for bleach. So that was kind of how we identified the insect category to go into. And then we had to try convince the company that it made sense to do so. So I know I just went on a long rambling rant and tried to put things together, but
you did, but that's okay. There was a lot of good, I think, nuggets in there. And I think one theme that you hit on is, and this has come up in a couple of the episodes, is kind of the power of like good mentors. And it sounds like Patrick Krause was one. Obviously you had, I think Kemi and Parton were other guys that, and Andy. So I think your careers really echo that, and a lot really during your decade at P&G. So that's amazing that you had someone like Patrick to kind of clear the path for you to kind of put your stamp on it there. On that, I imagine resource allocation is a tricky thing, right? Venture sounds buzzy and like it's well funded, but at the end of the day, like, again, P&G is a publicly traded company. Like, they have to satisfy the shareholders, so you're not going to get the same war chest as Tide, right? So how did resource allocation go? It's probably not like raising funding per se, but like, how did you guys go, and how could other listeners that are at big CPG companies like think about securing additional budget to, go out there and after launching a new brand or concept?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for us, it happened to be the right time, right place. Like the context of when I joined P&G Ventures is A.G. Lafley, who had been our prior CEO, had just come back as an interim CEO role. And he was very hot on, we need new innovation, we need new brands. So he kind of got behind this idea of the new ventures group. And it had a pretty healthy budget, right? Like nothing like a Tide or anything else, but like, tens of millions of dollars of budget to get headcount and go spend money and go run some experiments. So that's a pretty healthy budget for something like this. So at least we had the budget. Then within P&G Ventures, there were different groups similar to ours, right? Like we were trying to play in a variety of different spaces: skincare, men's grooming, this insect control market that we wanted to go after. That's where it was really, we took what I would call like, there's a book called Lean Innovation by Eric Ries that we tried to follow, which would be, great, we want to go into insect control. What are the experiments we could run to see, if we should actually do that? So we would try to like create some concepts. Great. We got good feedback on the concepts. Can we create prototypes and go, we went to like trade shows and tried to pitch in person to see if somebody would get out their wallet and buy it and be like, actually, it's not a real product, but we'll put you on the wait list. And here's a Starbucks gift card for talking to us. So we tried to do all these things to prove it out. We would run Facebook ads to a website that had like a pre-registration or sign up and try measure the interest that way. So honestly, it was like me and Patrick at the early days fighting for this, pretty small in the grand scheme of thing budget in a big company, like, millions of dollars, maybe $10 million, like, or less. And it was trying to run these experiments and come back and say, our data is better than all these other people that are running similar experiments. And we think that there's consumer heat here. Here's how much money we're asking for. Here's the next bigger experiment we want to go run to prove it out, right? So it's almost like software engineering. It's like, what's the version 1, version 2, version 3, or like, what's your crawl, walk, run plan? So that's how I would kind of, if you can frame it out of, if you can get data and prove that there's a need there, and then go use that to justify your budget against all the other people that are asking for money. Like, it's like anything, just like pitching to a VC. If you're a private company, like they hear hundreds of pitches. Like, why are they going to choose yours? You got to frame your internal pitch up just the same to go lock up that money. Obviously, I benefited from the fact that we were tasked to do that in ventures. So the money was there. I just had to say, like, why should you give it to me versus all these other people?
Right. And I think something to make clear to the listeners here, while sure there's a clear budget and substantial funding provided, there were multiple concepts running concurrently. It wasn't like Ventures went all in, hey, Zevo is our golden child. We're going to actually set them against multiple other concepts. So you have to kind of prove it out. And as certain benchmarks are hit, additional funding can be allocated. So again, I think for those of you just getting into innovation or the idea of like launching something, it's not just going to be, hey, we're just going to open up the purse strings. Like, make sure you're taking the path to really prove out what's that MVP, and what's going to help catalyze growth at the necessary velocity to really, drive that confidence from your 1-up, 2-up, 3-up bosses, to continue to kind of make bets on your concept versus someone else's.
Yeah. And I think you got to be honest too, right? Like at a big company, you're trained to always show the rosy picture, right? Like you do annual reviews, and the only things that end up in your review are all these great things that you did. And across the company, there may be 50,000 employees, and everybody's annual review has all the great things they did, but the company grew 1 or 2%. So you're kind of like, everybody can't be doing all these great things. So when you're trained to never talk about failures in big companies, like it's just how it is, what it is, right? Like whether that's right or wrong, when you're launching something, you have to quickly raise your hand and be like, shit, this did not work. Like we should probably pivot or shut it down. And I think if you're in a big company and you're doing that, like anytime I would do that, nobody ever faulted me, especially in the early days of Zevo. I'd be like, I don't think this is working, or we need to change our approach, or like this data isn't very good. Like, let's be honest with ourselves. That almost always unlocked us to pivot to something that worked better. But I saw so many innovation teams fall on their sword of like, they didn't want to look like they failed to their management or their leadership team. And that was more important than actually succeeding. So we would call them zombie projects. They would just keep these things alive and keep asking for funding and you knew it was never going to work and it was a bad idea. Again, I had a different perspective because I was like, I want to hit. Patrick wanted to hit. We both probably weren't going to be at the company for that long because of him retiring and me knowing I wanted to go, the private equity or founder route at some point. So we were just like, hey, this isn't working. Like, let's go do something different. And we did that a ton of times in the early days.
Yeah, it sounds like it's easier said than done, but to not enmesh your identity with like the project or concept. So no one wants to be themselves called a failure. So if the project or a component of it fails, you all of a sudden like lace that with your identity, which is not going to, it's going to be the road to nowhere, very dangerous territory. But I think in this, you're talking about what to measure, right? I think in sales and marketing, there's a lot of vanity metrics out there to just kind of portray that things are going well, but at the end of the day, they don't really mean shit. Yeah. So what were the metrics that you were really keen on in the early days of Zevo to say, hey, yes, this is working. We're seeing the success that we need and want?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a couple stories of what we did early on. I said one, that trade show story. So we had different pitches of how are we going to pitch this product. And every day at the trade show, we'd try a different pitch and we would visibly measure, like we talked to 100 people with this pitch and 20 of them got out their credit card and said, yeah, I'm interested. Like, that's good. We'd say that's a pretty good success rate. The next pitch might've been 5 people and you're like, this is a pretty bad one. And we kind of triangulate to like, what's the best pitch just from like reading body language and being intuitive about it and getting that data, which for me, it was always, will somebody actually pull out their credit card and vote with their dollars? In the early days, that's all I cared about. And like, what's the highest conversion rate, whether you're live pitching, whether you're doing other things. So we came up with this pitch that we thought was really good. And then I ended up hooking up with this guy who made as seen on TV commercials. So those like late night 2-minute commercials. The inventory is super cheap. We would buy like 2-minute TV spots for like $5, right? And you're running like late night on Fox Business, overnight on like crazy channels. So we turned our trade show pitch into a script for an as seen on TV commercial that we produce, on a very low budget. And then our measurement was how many people will actually go to the website or call in and order. And how does that compare against every other as seen on TV commercial that we had data on? And for us, we were performing within the range. We're like, like there are a lot of as seen on TV products that if they perform in this range based on the number of people that go online or call the phone number and buy the product, they tend to end up doing well at like a Walmart, a CVS, a Walgreens. And again, it was a pretty easy test for us to run. It didn't cost that much money in the grand scheme of things. So we did that. And it was always about conversions again for me. Like, how are we doing versus other people who have done well? Are we in that range of conversion rate? So we did that. And then the next step was launching a Shopify website, which I think everybody does right now. Like that's the first thing you would probably do in this day and age. And we took everything we learned from pitching in person, everything we learned from the as seen on TV stuff, and we turned it into a Shopify website, use Facebook and Instagram ads, video ads, static ads, motion graphic ads with a ton of different copy to try drive everybody there. And again, my whole thing was like, how do I make the website convert the highest it can be? And then how do I get my cost per acquisition down as low as it can be? At the time, Facebook was a lot easier. There wasn't as much competition. Things weren't as high. That the iOS update hadn't happened. So I think when we launched Zevo, we were probably at like a $50 cost per conversion, which wasn't going to be great, right? Because we had these like lower dollar value ring products. We were building basket size, but not a great conversion. By the end of it, just through running a ton of iterations of Facebook ads and videos and optimizing the copy on the website, we got it down to about a $9 to $11 cost per conversion, which in today's world, anybody would be thrilled with that. Like that's almost unheard of for Shopify websites. So we were like, wow, like even when I was talking to like other people who are VC funded outside of P&G, like this is a really good cost per acquisition. So again, my core metric was always, will consumers buy us, and can we be efficient in the way that they buy us? And that was where I was like, all right, I think we're ready for retail. Again, a lot of iteration along the way, but it wasn't an overnight thing. It was probably a year and a half, 2 years of like prototyping, fixing things, listening to reviews, tweaking copy until I finally felt I was ready to go, pitch something to a retailer and try put it on shelf.
On that note with retailers, so probably no surprise that P&G has access to some of the biggest retailers in the world, especially here in the U.S. But I can't imagine that even if you have great relationships with the buyers there, that they're just going to roll out the red carpet for a new concept and get you shelf space. So
Correct.
talk to us about which retailers did you start with? What was the receptiveness? Yes, you had the affiliation with P&G, so probably a little bit of a leg up, but also a new concept, right? So how did you pick? How did you advocate for more shelf space and kind of navigate like where in the planogram like was going to position Zevo the best?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to circle back to a comment you made earlier that I didn't really address, which was, how much innovation fails at big companies. It's the exact same as like the number of venture capital companies that fail, right? Like I think our hit rate of new initiatives, even if they were tied to a brand, like if Tide launched something or if Febreze launched something, um, you know, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 would fail, even with big budgets behind them, everything else. It was the same thing with like new brands. It's what the same hit rate with, venture capital funded companies. So that was always a challenge, right? Is like we could use the weight of P&G and we could go get distribution everywhere. But I always felt like the reason some of these things failed is we tried to run before we walked, right? So is and I fought a ton of battles within P&G because they're like, Zevo seems to be doing well on Shopify. I was like, great, we've sold like $2 million a year on Shopify with good conversion rates. I'm not ready to go into 100% of all stores across America. Like, we're just not there yet. And America doesn't even know about us. So how are we going to get moving off the shelf? Because we probably could have gotten, 80 to 90% distribution using the weight of P&G. I didn't want to do that. Other people were not doing that. If you look at, I think Harry's Razors at the time was probably the best model. Build a really good D2C business, build a good Amazon business, and then go to Target exclusively for 12 months. And like, you have 10% distribution because that's about what Target was at the time. And probably about 10% of America is aware of you. So your distribution is matched to your awareness. So it's a very manageable thing. You can drive people to Target. You can hit your metrics at Target so that you don't get delisted. It's a very manageable thing to chunk off. Then I think Harry's in year 2, Walmart came to them because they're like, hey, this is doing well at Target. We want you. Like Walmart was pulling them versus them pushing themselves into Walmart. So they go there. And then year 3, Kroger comes to you and says, hey, you're in Walmart and Target. We want you. And then you start to build this like pent up demand. And all the while, you can reasonably manage success metrics at those retailers that you probably couldn't do if you were in 50 different retailers trying to, fight 50 different battles and allocate a small budget across 50 retailers. It's just never going to work. So for us, I took an even more conservative approach. I said, this is an insect control product. Home Depot and Lowe's, besides Walmart, Home Depot and Lowe's are the next 2 largest by dollars and units moved places where people buy insect control. So we went to Home Depot, which P&G sells some stuff too there. There's a guy by the name of Dan Trowig, who was the only person that serviced the Home Depot account for all of P&G. And I called him. I was like, hey, I want to try pitch this to Home Depot. Like, would you help me? And he's like, they'll probably be thrilled because we've never come to them as P&G and said, we want to give you new innovation exclusively. He's like, sure, I'll help. It wasn't really like the company wasn't really sanctioned, but he kind of skunk works, like was like, yeah, come fly down and meet with me. I'll set up something with the buyer. It won't be official P&G business, but I'll help you like get your foot in the door. So we took that approach. He did that. We went to the buyer. Like he said, the buyer was thrilled that we were offering him exclusive innovation that would normally go to like a Target or a Walmart. And it was a pretty easy sell. Like he was like, sure, I'll run a test in about half of our stores for a year. If you hit your metrics, we'll go to all stores, but just give it to me for 12 months exclusive while we run this test, which was a no-brainer for me. So that's kind of how we initially thought about it, which again is much different than like the typical P&G model, which is like go as fast as you can, as quickly as you can. Like my vision was always, we're going to build this brand over 3 to 10 year time horizon. It doesn't need to be an overnight success, which at a big company that's publicly traded, they want it to be an overnight success.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with singles and doubles. Everyone wants a home run. Just getting on base, especially in the early days, is good and proving it out versus crippling your supply chain or taking a huge whiff. Going off that, I mean, you were, I guess your biggest ahas in terms of transitioning from, okay, I'm brand manager to now founding, like, are there 2 to 3 that are just very salient to you that stand out?
Yeah, I think the first one is whether you're in like brand management at a big company, finance at a big company, whether you're in consulting at like Bain or McKinsey, it's like you learn a really good base of business of how to look at a business and diagnose problems. So that's what you do all day in brand management. Where you lack is the execution side, most likely. Like you want to have too many meetings and talk about it to death, and you don't actually take action. So you get really good at diagnosing problems, but then you're slow to move. When I moved in the ventures group, I realized like I had to use that skill set to quickly diagnose problems, but knew it didn't have to be perfect and biased towards action, where it was more important for me to move and run and like, fail quickly, pivot, learn, than try to get it perfect. And I think in big companies, everyone wants to get it perfect, but you really should like use everything you've learned, make the best educated guess that you can, have a good hypothesis, and then quickly just go execute. And if you fall on your face, get back up and reformulate your hypothesis and then go execute again until you get it right. So that would be like the first insight. I think the second insight is try to unlearn everything you learned about how to go to market in a traditional big company role. So when I took the ventures role, I specifically used the power of P&G to reach out to people on LinkedIn. Like I talked to a founder of Casper Mattress. I talked to a guy who started a company called Tipsy Elves, which is they make kind of novelty party apparel. A bunch of these D2C businesses that had popped up. And I just kind of like we're doing right now, I just interviewed them on like what's working about it. Like, how do you run your business? Like, what metrics do you measure? Like, what advertising platforms are you using? And I just made a log of all the things that these people are doing across the 10 founders of these like web companies or e-commerce companies, what they were doing, and identified patterns and commonalities, and basically said, I'm going to run this playbook and throw all the advice of the internal people at P&G out the window. And I'm just going to stay laser focused on doing what these guys who are currently having success doing what I want to do are actually doing in the market. So those are probably like the two biggest things, which is one, bias towards execution and trust your gut. And then two, study the people that are doing what you want to do and don't take the advice from the big company that hasn't been able to do it well for years and years and years.
Yeah, I think both are great points. And your second one specifically, I'm in sales. I've had my entire career has been in sales. And so I'm accustomed to having to reach out to people blindly and try to connect and network. I think if, anyone that's listening is at a big co, like you have, I think a leg up when it comes to proactively networking. So if you have any hesitation of reaching out to the founder of this kind of buzzy startup brand, I think they would be more receptive and willing to hear from you all, because there's some things that you might have in place from an infrastructure standpoint that could help serve them.
Or connections, right? Because they all want to get acquired. So if you can make an intro to somebody who can acquire them, like they'd be thrilled.
So if anything, I just really want to encourage, go out there, actively network, identify, as you said, Sean, I think identify the people that are doing what you want to be doing or running, growing in a way that you want to for your business. But if you're at a big co, probably have a massive leg up and can do a lot more networking, which is going to benefit your business, either short-term, long-term, and also you can kind of pay it back to them. So definitely take advantage and get your neck out there, either LinkedIn or setting up coffees in town, especially if you're in a hot market like New York or Chicago, Cincinnati, where Sean and I are, but absolutely take advantage. Sean, was there any moment, we talked about not hiding from the failures. Is there any point where you thought Zevo's going to crater? Just like, oh shit, this isn't working. Like I gotta figure something out here.
Yeah, man, I think a ton of times. There was one point, like, so just for context for the audience, when we initially launched the Zevo brand, there was a plug-in trap, which was like a blue light trap with some citric acid that would attract fruit flies and bugs that would be in your room. So in your kitchen, other places, and they would get stuck on this little sticky pad that was kind of hidden from the consumer, and you'd throw this cartridge away and put a new one on. So that was kind of the first product. I didn't think that was going to be the only thing that could carry the brand. I thought we needed a lineup. So there were kind of two oh shit moments in this. One was when we first started selling the trap on Shopify. We had a New York Times article through somebody in our PR department had a connection there. They wrote up about this product, which we didn't pay for. It was like we kind of got lucky, right? From the moment that went live on like the Sunday New York Times lifestyle page, like we sold out of all of our inventory that we had planned for like the next 6 months within like 5 days. The problem with that is we hadn't done enough marketing and education yet. So everybody that was buying it from this New York Times article didn't know where to put this thing. So they'd put it like in their bedroom where there were no bugs, or they'd put it like, on the other side, 30 feet away in their kitchen from where fruit flies were, or they wouldn't put it near an entryway, or they wouldn't put it in their garage or in their basement. So we were getting flooded with all these like, bad reviews and emails saying this thing's crap, it doesn't work. So I was like panicking. I'm like, maybe this thing really is bad. Maybe it doesn't work. Like maybe it's time to just like move on and hang it up. But we had a really good, I had a couple of people on our consumer research and R&D team who were awesome. We just started picking up the phone and calling all these people and started interviewing them and be like, well, where are you using it? And they would we get them to send us pictures. They talk to us, and we realized pretty quickly, like, people are putting it in the wrong spots. They're putting it where they don't have the problem and thinking that like, if you put it in your bedroom, but your bug problem is 3 rooms over, that the bugs are magically going to navigate through your house and end up on this thing. So once we would educate them where to put it, immediately we'd flip it to like 4.5 or 5-star reviews. They'd be like, oh, it's working. This is great. We love it. So quickly what we did was we sent out an email to everybody that bought it with like a video instruction. I think I was the one like talking and demoing how to use the product. We sent a PDF instruction sheet out to everyone over email. And then going forward, we had an email series that anytime anybody bought, they got a series of how to use it, where to use it, what rooms to use it in. Every thing that went out from our 3PL had a pamphlet on like getting started and like where to common areas to place it and tips and tricks if it's not working. And immediately we stopped getting these bad reviews and we went up to like 4.5 or 5 stars. But without calling like probably 50 people, we would have never figured that out, and we probably just would have shut down the project. So that was kind of oh shit number one. I think the second piece there was I knew that we need like some additional products. So we found some sprays, some insect sprays that were like Raid, but were really good and, would work just as well. Like you could side by side, it would kill a roach just as quickly as Raid, but it was made from like essential oils and you could essentially like spray it in your mouth and you wouldn't die. You'd be completely fine. So we did this license deal with a company that had the technology. We rushed a bunch of it to market. We didn't do enough on like the scent profile. And we realized like there was too much of one ingredient that just smelled absolutely atrocious. So we'd probably run like 10,000 units of this thing on the production line, got it into market. And we're like, holy crap, everybody hates the smell of this thing. Like this is going to tank it. Like nobody's going to want to reuse this if it makes your rooms smell weird for like 8 hours after using it. So again, we called a bunch of people, tried to identify what it was, did a bunch of like scent profile work, worked with the people we licensed the technology from to dampen down that scent. But I thought it was the end. I was like, the company's going to want to cancel this. We're going to get terrible reviews. But uncovering that up front and just being honest with everybody, it'd be like, hey, we messed this up. People hate the scent. We know what they hate about it. We can go reformulate, and we think that we're going to get better reviews because people like the idea of it and they're spending their money on it. But if it's just not delivering in that usage moment or that at-home moment, which we call the second moment of truth. If we can solve that, I think we've got a winner product that people want to buy because they love the concept. And then if it doesn't make their room stink for 8 hours, like weird essential oils, like you just went to like yoga and some lady rubbed like essential oils on your forehead, like that's the win. But I thought surely both of those times we're going to sink the brand because we were getting 1.5, 2-star reviews. But it was always just a minor thing, either missed expectations or one tiny thing that you could tweak that would solve the entire problem for them.
Since you brought up your first point, I think there's a Voltaire quote that's been floating around in my head that common sense isn't so common. So I think if you're going to assume that the consumer is going to use your product without any type of like precise instruction, it's not going to happen. Like, especially now, you're talking about this theme of like education and entertainment or edutainment. Like, yeah, every brand is doubling down on video. Look at Amazon listings and how explicit some of the directions are in the images and the bullets and the A+ content. Like they're telling you it again, and they're telling you one more time. So just make sure you figure that out. If you take nothing else away from this, definitely focus on number one. With what Sean brought up, and make sure you're equipping your customer to have a positive experience with your product. Because if you don't, it's going to be you're coming from behind there. So
yeah, I think the other piece, James, like one point that I would make too is kind of along this theme of like building awareness with your distribution and kind of getting retailers to pull you instead of pushing yourselves in there. Like we had a pretty good year the first year we went to Home Depot. I think it was manageable because at the time, I don't know if this tactic would still work. Like you always have to evaluate tactics based on the time and the brand and the place. But we were in like 500, 600 Home Depot stores. And I, at the time, would geofence them in Instagram and Facebook. And I would basically run ads within like 2 miles of those stores with a call to action to like go buy the product in store. And I like I split test that for when I ran ads to the store versus didn't. I would drive like an extra like, 2.5 units a week where I was running ads versus where I wasn't. So I quickly figured out I could kind of game the success metrics of Home Depot by running these geo-targeted Facebook ads. Because I think my metric was like, hey, if you move like 0.8 units per store per week, we'll be happy. And by geo-fencing all their stores and running these Facebook and Instagram ads, if I was moving like 2 to 3 units per store per week, it looked like we blew this test out of the water. So it was like a very efficient way to kind of use advertising that was manageable, right? Because it was 500 stores. I knew that I could drive traffic through 500 stores, and I had a tactic that worked to do that. But then that data got us full distribution in Home Depot. And then because they took us full distribution, we had this great unit per store per week metric. Target, when we went to Target, they were already interested because of how well we were doing on Shopify, and then it was doing well at Home Depot. So it made the sales pitch for like the exclusive to Target in the next year way easier. And I had left around the time we got distribution and sold into Target to go work for a private equity backed company. But from people that I was friends with the brand, it went to Target. It did well there. They kind of ran that same playbook. And then Walmart called them and said, we want it. Like, what can we do? Like year 3, like we want it in every store. So they didn't even really have to pitch Walmart. It was kind of like a Target has it, Home Depot has it. You're like the jealous stepsister, and they would do anything they could to get it. So I think that's the lesson here is like most success stories aren't built overnight. And if you try to force it overnight, they turn into failures. And this is true of almost every consumer brand that I've seen built over the past decade. There's usually years in a methodical, slow plan that builds awareness and distribution together. And then all of a sudden, 7 to 8 years in, you're like, who's this new brand and how did they become an overnight success? But it was really, a smart, methodical rollout over a very long period of time with a lot of effort and work that went into it.
So, I mean, this has been great. I think there's a lot of actionable takeaways, and excited that this one appeals to maybe those in bigger organizations as well. So I think, thank you for sharing your background on that. There's 2 things I want to close on. One is a softball question. How did you land on Zevo? Like the name, like talk to me about the name. Like why Zevo Insect?
Dude, man, anybody that's named anything in a private company or a big CPG company knows that like you basically have to start back from like what URLs are available and what things have not been trademarked yet. So like we basically we hired a naming agency, which maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Like you probably don't need to do that. You could probably just use ChatGPT and have it crank out like 100 names and do a knockout list. But we paid an agency a lot of money to come up with like a list of all these names. A lot of ones we love, but then you'd immediately go search URLs or search trademarks and knock out like all of them. So we had about like 10 left. I think there was Zevo, there was Fend, there was I think Orb, there was a few in them. Then we were like, you know what? Like it doesn't really matter because the consumer, like some of these things are just nonsensical. So you can like Tide, like what did that mean? Why was that associated with laundry? They just came up with a word and said rising tides of suds was their like tagline early on, but like Tide has nothing to do with laundry. So our approach is like, let's pick a word that has no meaning assigned to it and let's create the meaning for it. So we like Zevo. We wanted something that was 2 syllables, 3-4 letters that easily rolled off the tongue, could be written well. We liked that the V could be turned into a bug for the logo. We just thought that was kind of like a little flying insect. I thought that was cool. And my idea at the time, which got I got beat over the head and almost thrown out of the company for by all the lawyers was Zevo means 0 bugs, 0 worries, or something like that. Like zero bugs, 0 chemicals, 0 worries. And they're like, no, like you can't say 0. like get the hell out. You can't make that claim because there's no way you can support that. But that was my plan. It was Zevo means like 0 bugs, 0 chemicals, 0 worries. Like that was going to be the tagline, but legal had other ideas.
Oh man, I always love the kind of naming origin story. I think that's something we need to ask future guests on as well. Because you never
It's
know.
great, man. But I think my advice to anybody working in consumer goods that's trying to name something is like, you can do a ton of consumer tests and a ton of like, do you like this? Do you not like this? But like, if it's something they've never heard before, or if it's a made up word, they have no notions of what it is. So you have a blank sheet of paper to go make them feel a certain way about a word. So I kind of took a lot of the research as a grain of salt. Like if I'm putting 5 made up words in front of somebody and they don't like the way this thing made them feel, I'm like, yeah, but once I put a jingle to it or assign a meaning to it, like I'll get to dictate how they feel about it, or like help dictate how they feel about it. So use your gut, find something that you like that sounds catchy, that's easy to say, and then ascribe your own meaning to it and help the consumer figure out what you want it to mean.
Well, you're very active on, I think, paying it forward, meeting with people, sharing your knowledge and experience. What's something people might not be able to glean from, your social media accounts? What's something that you might want to share with everyone just about your background? That's not, something that you actively promote or discuss?
Oh gosh, man.
Set us a hot seat, not the lukewarm seat.
That's great. I honestly, I'm not that interesting, to be completely honest. I mean, I live a pretty boring life, but I try to be helpful where I can. I think I've certainly failed at a lot of things. I've certainly not done well at a lot of things, but I try to, at least professionally, just be curious. Sometimes to my detriment. So I've taken a non-traditional path many times, like at P&G, like, going to the ventures group. Most people probably wouldn't do that. They want to take a safer role. I just thought if I found something intellectually curious or something could be fun, I would just go pursue it, because I feel like what's the point of life if you're trying to, follow a path that you think is right or that somebody else wants for you. It's led me to good places. It's led me to bad places. I think I've collected a lot of experiences through that, but I think as long as you're intellectually curious, which is probably why we're doing this podcast, because we love talking to people and learning about their journey. That would be my biggest advice. I think you can find yourself into really interesting spots, and then just be really open to like where it takes you. Like try not to go in with a preconceived notion of like what your life has to be or what your career has to be 3, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. Like have a roadmap, and like that's great, but let that be pretty loose and flexible. Our current company, Cincy Brands, like I'm doing a lot of third-party logistics services for e-commerce brands and for Amazon FBA. Never thought I would be in that business, but I actually enjoy it, and there's a need that we can serve. And I've been open enough to find opportunities or find areas where you can go into and not feel like I only have to do one thing in this bucket for the rest of my career. So again, it served me well. I've probably like taken detours before or done things that haven't panned out as well as I thought they would in my head, but I always learn something. I always stay curious, and, don't feel like you get boxed in. I also probably have severe ADD, so that's probably why I do it that way, but
Keeps things fresh.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much. This was incredible. I've known you as long as I have, and still learn new things every time we talk. So great to present your founder's journey to the audience. So for those of you listening, you can follow and find Sean on LinkedIn, on X. Make sure to follow BrandBusters, where you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and we'll be back with another great batch of founders here soon.
And we just launched a new website, refresh website, thebrandbusters.com. We've got everything archived there, so you can watch YouTube videos on the site. You can stream Apple Podcasts on the site for each of the episodes, and then you can link out to Spotify, anywhere else that you get your podcasts. So we don't monetize this. James and I do this out of our own desire to learn, to add value, and to hope others in our situation that are in the CPG and e-commerce space can learn and find value. So as of right now, no advertisements. We don't monetize it. So it's purely out of our passion and our passion to help others learn the same things that we're learning through these conversations. So if you find value in this, the best thing that you can do for us is share it with a colleague, send it on a Slack group that you have at work, send it an episode that you like as an email to somebody that might find it helpful. Again, we're not making any money. We do this to be helpful. And the biggest success metric for us is how many people can listen to it and find some piece of value out of it. Although you guys probably find no value in anything that I said because I ramble and my wife would tell me, why would anybody want to listen to you talk for 30 or 40 minutes? But here we are.
Hey, we have a red light. It's flashing right now. We've got to go. So
see you guys.
See ya.